Hello， 大家好，又係我高 B 哥啊，係時間提醒大家飲水啦，增添智慧，增添水分，智慧如水啊！好啦，嚟到錄片時間，2025年嘅7月25號啊，高 B 哥咧今日咧一定要放呢條嘅影片咧俾大家睇。嗱，一陣間我講完咧就會放影片。咁其實咧呢個影片咧，我早2日咧做過咧一個即係我自己嘅影片咧俾大家噶啦。咁就講咧就話一個叫 Andrew Brown 嘅人，咁啊攞呢個普立茲獎。其實咧佢對中國咧真係非常之咁熟悉嘅。就係呢個人咧就話俾你聽咧，中國而家根本咧就係完勝呢個美國 outplay 啊，即係話咧玩贏佢啊，壓倒性咁樣贏佢。咁啊佢講嘅咧就係話打呢個關稅戰。大家咧一路咧提升上去嘅時候，最後咧中國咧就用我唔同你玩啦，跟住就用供應鏈嚟贏你。嗱，實際上咧就唔係話中國咧淨係因為有稀土啊，佢講得好清楚，唔係淨係因為有稀土，所以咧就完勝美國，而係因為咧中國有個咧好強勁嘅供應鏈，而呢個供應鏈咧唔單止啊係咧今次咧贏美國噶，而且咧仲要係話咩咧？仲要係話美國咧，如果想再次偉大，咁啊按照呢個思路咧，呢個特朗普咧就講美國要再次偉大，第一樣要做嘅係咩咧？就係再工業化，係咪？如果要再工業化嘅話咧，根本咧美國咧係離唔開中國噶，因為咧中國個供應鏈啦，同埋咧嗰個產業嘅個齊全咧，實在咧係咧美國咧冇辦法匹敵噶。咁啊，最後啊，就算美國想再工業化，買嘅機器咧，根本都係喺中國嚟嘅，咁所以咧，佢話美國你想再工業化，你想再次偉大，你咪又係靠中國嗱。不過咧，佢講一樣嘢咧，真係好犀利。佢話特朗普咧係咧好咧對呢個咧嘅國家領導即係呢個咧強人啊，譬如咧係習主席啊，又或者嗰啲普京啊嗰啲咧，佢咧真係非常之咁咧就係即係 admire 佢哋，即係可以咁講，好尊敬佢哋，好尊崇佢哋噶。咁佢話如果啊真係咧習主席咧肯見佢嘅話，佢而家第一時間啊即刻坐上個飛機度，即刻飛過嚟見習主席，佢都會噶。咁啊喂。你話喂高 B 哥，佢講嘅就係咩？咁但係咧，佢對成個世界嘅認識咧，就唔係你同我咁簡單。佢係咧非常知道世界咧係點樣運作，而且咧媒體係點樣運作㗎。咁呢啲嘢咧，即係冇得呃嘅。嗱，見識就係咁樣嚟啦。而且咧，佢喺中國咧係住咗好多年。咁啊，記者喺度問佢。佢話：喂，你對而家中國嘅見解係點？係咪真係咧冇自由？其實佢咧都唔係好想承認，又唔係好想否認。不過咧到最後咧，佢都話咧，其實佢咧18年之後咧，佢就離開咗中國嘅。咁因為咧開始咧越嚟越咧鉗制得緊要。咁啊記者喺裏邊咧攞唔到咩料，有咧嗰啲所謂叫做 source，即係嗰啲咧資料來源嗰度咧，想再做嘢咧都做唔到。佢咧想再做深入啲攞資料嘅時候咧，就已經俾公安咧就監察到，跟住咧即刻咧就叫對方唔好再俾料。咁啊呢個佢講法，咁啊佢亦都講得非常唔清楚。呢個唔係淨係中國做緊㗎，美國一樣做緊，歐洲一樣做緊㗎。咁所以咧，只係話咧媒體咧將呢件事咧就煲大誇大咧嚟到講中國係幾咁嚴重嘅啫。實際上全個世界都係咁樣做嘅。OK， 嗱喂，大家咧認真啲去睇呢條影片，好精彩，加埋佢嗰個語調啊，佢個講法咧，你會聽到咧，佢點樣去咧評價咧中國啊、美國咁樣，係非常之咁清楚嘅。OK， 嗱，而家去片先啦。
Of the US-China relationship since President Trump took over the White House once again.
It's in a bad place, and it suffers from enormous contradictions. And the central contradiction is that at a high level, at a strategic level, there is an almost complete absence of trust. So each side thinks the very worst of the other side. China thinks that the United States is out to throttle its development, kill its economy. The US thinks that China is out to expel the United States from Asia. So they're competitors. They are rivals. In some ways, they are adversaries. We had a Pentagon official in Australia the other day saying to the effect that we'd be lucky to get through to the 2030s without conflict with China. So that's where we are. That's Elbridge Colby, who is in charge of policy at the Pentagon. So that's where we are at a strategic level. And yet, these two economies are joined at the hip. And that is what we have discovered from the two of them slugging it out in this trade war.
How so?
So it starts off as a tariff war. And by the way, I think that China has completely outplayed the Trump administration on trade in this episode. It starts off with tariffs, and Trump escalates. Starts off, I can't even remember, right? It's 50%, and it ratchets all the way up to 145%. China, no country is supposed to hit back at this. You're not supposed to take your revenge on the Trump administration. You're supposed to suck it up. China didn't. Went toe-to-toe, went up to 125%, which is more or less prohibitive, right? So now we have a mutual trade blockade. And the US caved. They completely caved, right? So they went to Geneva, took off most of the tariffs, unwound, then we got back to roughly 30%, 20% fentanyl, 10% baseline, plus legacy, 20%. That's what. However, that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was this supply chain war. And the US completely underestimated China on this one. So you had Scott Bessent, incredibly sophisticated investor, ran his own hedge fund in New York. He's saying at the beginning of all this, we have all the cards, right? So if they export 5 times as much to us as we export to them, we've got the cards. He used this poker analogy. He said, they're sitting at the table and playing with a pair of 2s, right? So
they might have all the cards, but they don't have all the rare earths.
Well, that's exactly right. So they flip the cards, and it turns out that China's got a couple of aces, right? So, and one of them, the most important one is rare earths. And so now they start, hurling thunderbolts at each other, right? This is a war of the worlds. This is supply chain. So, China says to the okay, we're gonna close down your defense sector, and they can do that, right? They control the permanent magnets, and the US says, okay, fine, we're going to stop the sale of jet engines to you. So we're going to close down your entire civilian airliner program. China says, fine, we'll close your auto industry down, right? And actually, Ford had to close down a factory in Michigan. There are scores of these batteries. So this is how that was far more consequential. Got to the point where both sides recoiled from this. It was going to do enormous damage, both to their own economies, of course, to the global economy, since the two of them combined are like 50% of global GDP. That is where we are now. We are at a truce. Trump thinks he has a deal. Doesn't have a deal at all. He has a truce.
How do you see it playing out from here?
Well, it's so Trump really wants a summit with Xi Jinping. He is desperate to get on a plane, go to China, sit down, man to man. He's very deferential to these powerful global leaders, Putin in Russia, Xi Jinping. His last time around, he called Xi Jinping admiringly the emperor of China, right? So he thinks, okay, the two of us are going to sit down, we're going to hash it all out. I don't think this is the way the Chinese are going to play this at all. I mean, they've seen the video, right? They've seen the ritual humiliation of Zelensky. You never said thank you once. Ramaphosa from South Africa was in there. He had to suck it up. Dim the lights. Let's play this ludicrous video from Xi Jinping is not going to take that. He will not be humiliated in any way. His Sherpa's going to be out there. They're going to have everything nailed down, buttoned down before the event. Very, very ceremonial. But I do think we're starting to see the beginnings of what might look like some kind of negotiated settlement. We saw part of that today with the decision to allow NVIDIA chips, H20 chips, into China. The Trump administration had actually banned those chips. So there could be something to play for in terms of lifting some of the sanctions on technology in exchange for rare earths. But then again, that's only getting back to the status quo, right?
If you put this in a kind of game theory context, you say that China has outplayed the US when it comes to the tariff dispute thus far, but is there an argument to be made that by playing the rare earths card and restricting the supply of rare earths, China has actually woken much of the so-called Western world up to the supply chain issue you identify? So the Europeans and the Americans, for example, are saying, right, we have to move with immediacy to ensure that actually we aren't reliant on the Chinese in the future for this rare earth supply?
You're absolutely right, and this is now a kind of a warp speed moment for the United States, and you're going to see a lot of money going into the production of rare earths magazines. You're already starting to see it. It takes time, right? So this is not an overnight solution by any means. The other problem that the US has is that you're much better off, if you want to go up against China, you're much better off doing it in a coalition with allies, right? So, and this is part of the underestimation that, and I don't think that Trump or Bessent went into these talks understanding it, or a figure like Peter Navarro, who's all for decoupling the economies, that China's industrial base is the United States, plus Germany, plus Japan, plus South Korea, and then some, right? So, it is literally the case that if part of the rationale for the tariffs is to reshore manufacturing to the United States, there is actually no reindustrialization of America without China. If Apple wanted to move its production of iPhones to the United States, if it was possible, which I don't think it is, if it was possible, they would have to take Chinese-made equipment, machinery with them. So it's not just rare earths.
Yeah.
China is a global manufacturing Goliath. America may be the financial superpower. China is the manufacturing superpower, and that gives it an incredible base on which to build the technologies of the future, where China is now running away with it in many areas.
By some measures, the amount of money that China has invested in the Belt and Road Initiative since the start of the century is equivalent to, or even more, than the amount of money that the US spent on wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Are there things that Western observers perhaps still misunderstand about Xi Jinping's vision for China?
Yeah, they misunderstand this vision entirely. And look, nobody else is building bridges. I think China gets a bad rap when it comes to the Belt and Road. I mean, and this all starts with India, with his analyst, and he's talked about debt trap diplomacy and so on and so forth. The debt trap diplomacy is actually a bit of a myth. China is supplying public goods to the world now in clean tech. America has just, by the way, walked out of the energy transition. If you're in Africa, if you're in Latin America, if you're in the Middle East and you want clean tech, you're going to go to China, right? So this is the way that China, and it used to be this. It's in the Cold War, we were talking about war of hearts and minds. China is winning substantially that war of hearts and minds against the United States in the developing world, and it's an important trend.
What makes China vulnerable? I think about the obvious economic slowdown. Youth unemployment is still putting forward some pretty eye-watering figures domestically within China at the moment. Are there things that you think make China's position in the world vulnerable going forward?
Look, at a macro level, China has problems. Okay, so you identified the key problems. The economy is slowing. A multi-year real estate meltdown. Prices continue to drop. High-quality real estate developers continue to face problems. High youth unemployment. This feeds into a real problem with consumer demand. Okay, so, and this affects New Zealand. So you're selling into the Chinese middle classes. Your core market in China is feeling a lot of economic pain, but China can take that pain. And this is another thing that the Trump administration didn't really understand, right? So China is prepared to sacrifice growth. It's prepared to write off whole provinces because its game now is focusing on technology. Xi Jinping believes that we're at an inflection point. He calls it an opportunity unseen in a century, and that opportunity is to take on and win the tech war against the United States. That is where he's applying his resources, whole of nation, public-private partnerships, universities, bottomless supplies of state funding, enormously wasteful. People focus on the waste, but also incredibly effective.
In trying to analyse the competition between the US and China in the tech space, I think maybe the mainstream wisdom has been that the US has dominated artificial intelligence, but that China's well ahead when it comes to clean technologies. Is that right?
Well, according to ASPE, China is ahead in 47. What's the number? 47 to 51 technologies that are going to make the 21st century. On AI, I was in China quite recently. In fact, I was there on April the 2nd, Liberation Day, and people pretty much shrugged it off. And one of the reasons is that they're getting their mojo back, and part of that is DeepSeek, right?
Yeah.
So this was a David and Goliath story, right? So all the big tech giants in Silicon Valley, they're spending $1 billion and more on large language models. This little sort of plucky startup from Hangzhou comes along, operating out of a small apartment. They come up with a model that's not bad. It was not quite as good as the
ChatGPTs of the world.
ChatGPT, but gets the job done. Everybody in America first reaction is, oh my God, they must have stolen it from us, as per usual. But no, China has armies of engineers, and they're producing breakthroughs. And now you've got all these intelligent agents, these apps. And Manus is one of them. Everybody is on their phone playing with this. The Chinese are great at adopting, industry is great at adopting technology, and they're now integrating this immediately into production. And this has given them Philippines, given the markets in Hong Kong, by the way. People in China are now starting to reinvest in the Hong Kong market because they're investing in their own tech companies that are listed there.
Personally speaking, how do you feel about the freedom that you might or might not have to criticise China? Do you ever feel like you have to self-censor?
Not really. I lived in China for many years. I wrote a column for the Wall Street Journal. I was pretty critical. I was critical of a lot of the things that Xi Jinping was doing. But since I've left, that was in 2018, things have tightened up. There are very few journalists left in China. They're monitored, they're surveyed, very difficult to get information. It's like the old days, it's sort of back in the 80s, early 90s. You try to get an interview with a source, and the source gets a call from the public security, or gets a call from public security before you've even got the interview, and they back off. So it's closing. People say that the United States is looking inward. China's looking inward too.
Finally, and I realise this might be a difficult ask, but can you shake the magic 8 ball for us? At the end of the century, when you think about the contest between the US and China, how do you see it sitting?
So I think on the tech side, it's all to play for. The US has deep capital markets, unmatched venture capital industry. That funds a great deal of innovation. It gives the United States global power and respect. China is the manufacturing superpower. As I said earlier, I think that from that base, China now starts to develop technologies. And we've seen in sector after sector, China is either catching up with the United States or has drawn level with the United States, and in many cases is pulling away. I wouldn't count the United States out. I wouldn't count the innovation, the ingenuity of American tech companies. But neither would I dismiss the challenge from China. They are very, very focused, and they have a system which works extremely well for them. Everybody got that wrong. They all thought that the socialist market economy would collapse under its own contradictions, waste, and so on. A lot of contradictions, and heaven knows there's a lot of waste in the Chinese system, but they also have awesome capabilities.
好啦，嗱，翻嚟啦嚇。嗱，其實咧，佢最後講到咧就係話咧，美國啊，就算佢金融業有幾強勁都好啦， 相反地咧，佢咧嗰個所謂叫做製造業同埋供應鏈嗰部分咧，係完全咧唔能夠同中國匹敵噶。而呢樣嘢咧就係中國嘅武器啦。呢個咧就可以講咧就係話咧，美國啊，就算以後點樣去做都好啦，佢根本咧都係要靠中國。嗱，所以咧有陣時咧，我哋要明白咧，每一樣嘢咧唔係咧單獨抽出嚟睇，又或者咧只係咧單一件事件啊，一個工具啊，一個武器咧就能夠咧可以咧係稱王稱霸，或者喺個世界裏邊咧繼續贏落去噶。咁啊，美國而家嘅金融業咧，佢要咧強力咁樣去維護住。但係如果咧連金融業都打破埋嘅話咧，咁咧美國同中國嘅競爭力咧就可以咁樣講啊，直情咧冇得比噶啦。咁啊，而家咧可能咧特朗普咧真係好擔心。好擔心咧，嗰個咧美元霸權同埋金融霸權嗰樣嘢，咁啊可能咧佢着力咧喺嗰度咧會更加多噶，咁所以咧我認為啊佢咧喺重建嗰個所謂叫再工業化之餘咧，佢都要強化咧佢呢個嘅金融啊同埋美元嘅能力，呢個咧你會見到佢咧再出好多手，可能咧係夾硬壓制、夾硬強迫，同埋咧夾硬咧會逼其他嘅國家盟友咧就係唔可以做呢樣嘢嘅。係咪咁多個國家真係會順佢意，跟佢嘅意思去做呢？呢個呢，真係要睇下啦。我自豪因我多角度思考，晏啲再見，拜拜。